Behind the Stripes football webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Wall-Jasper, along with Tribune football beat writer David Morrison. David, Missouri coming off a 28-21 victory over Texas A&M, so they qualify for the SEC championship game against Auburn. Big doings.
Just like everybody thought before the year.
Just as we expected. Well, let's start off with the A&M game, because that was what I think most of us considered probably the biggest home game in 53 years. So Missouri, I thought maybe the key to the game was the job they did on Johnny Manziel, holding him to a pretty reasonable total. He threw for about 200 yards, didn't go crazy running the ball on him. And just the fact they held him 3 touchdowns. Yeah. I thought particularly in the fourth quarter when the game was tied, they handed it to him twice and their offense was stalled out, and it was you sort of had that feeling that something bad was going to happen for Missouri, but they get 2 3-and-outs, then they also get a 3-and-out on the final drive. Just your thoughts on the plan they had for him and then the execution of the plan.
Yeah, I mean, they held him to his lowest total offense total in 24 starts at the collegiate level. You know, he had a lower total against Rice, but he had to sit out the first half because of all those autographs and all that stuff. But it started up front. Obviously, they did a good job maintaining their rush lanes and not getting, too far upfield and giving him those escape routes that he likes to take when he starts scrambling. I mean, they were almost too cautious sometimes, which is why I think the halfback run game works so well. You know, they almost kind of sunk back and waited sometimes and allowed themselves to get blocked, and that's why the lanes kind of opened up for the halfbacks. But I mean, that's something you'll take if it means Johnny Manziel's not running for 200 yards against you, which is what they limited him, I think, to only 20, 21 yards, something like that. So the line did a really good job, and then also they had a little bit of a spy thing going on every now and then with Andrew Wilson, who had a really good game, I thought, not only spying Manziel and, kind of stopping him short of the marker a couple times, but also just making plays in the run game too, just running downfield to the hole and making big hits and things like that. And then in the secondary, they didn't stop paying attention to the receivers when Manziel started scrambling. That's also where a lot of A&M's big plays come from, is the receivers keep the routes alive, the cornerbacks start looking in the backfield, and all of a sudden you've got a 50-yard gain. Well, Missouri's cornerbacks and safeties didn't do that. They stuck with the receivers and really didn't let much of anything happen downfield. So, I mean, it was all 11 guys, and they had a really good plan for him.
Only really on that Texas A&M's third touchdown, I thought, did they really kind of get lost in the secondary when he scrambled out of trouble, and just before Michael Sam got him, he throws it to a pretty wide open guy. The other thing about Missouri was really shut down Evans. That was 4 catches for 8 yards. I don't know what was going on with him, if E.J. Gaines played the game of his life or somehow Evans had kind of checked out or whatever, but he was a total. I remember he caught a short pass in the fourth quarter, and I just thought, I'd forgotten he was involved in this game whatsoever. Right. I mean, that was a bizarre no-show, I thought, for him.
Yeah, and the funny thing was, I mean, they only targeted him those 4 times, too. It's not like they kept trying for him and they couldn't find him. I mean, they threw it to him 4 times, he caught it 4 times, and only got 8 yards out of it. So, yeah, I think a lot of it was E.J. Gaines just kind of blanketing him, and then once he did get the ball, making the stop before he could do really any damage.
Well, as I mentioned, it was kind of an atypical game in that this year Missouri has kind of bolted out of the gate and played with a lead pretty much the whole season. Offensively, has been a team that just kind of ran the ball whenever it wanted. That really was not the way this game played out. Although Texas A&M's really got the worst defense in the SEC, Missouri struggled to move the ball on them. They trail at halftime, which they hadn't done all year, and then they kind of fizzle out there early in the fourth quarter. It really seemed like the stage was being set for one of those Missouri moments where you're on the verge of something very great, and then it's just the carpet is pulled out from under you, and Lucy picks up the football just as Charlie Brown is charging for the field goal. Didn't happen, though. And for this team, they've met some pretty big challenges. There have been a lot of times throughout the year where they've had a chance to, for lack of a better phrase, pull a Missouri, and they haven't. Do you think maybe it's time with this team, at least, that you would kind of retire that whole storyline that Missouri has a way of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory?
Well, and the other encouraging thing for Missouri was, I'm pretty sure, I mean, I'd have to go back and look, obviously, but I'm pretty sure that was the first game they'd trailed in the second half since Arkansas State. I mean, they were down, I think, by 2 to Arkansas State in the third quarter and scored 27 straight points or whatever to finish that game out. But that's Arkansas State. This is Texas A&M. This is a team with a Heisman Trophy winner and one of the best offenses in the country. And yeah, the fact that they go into the halftime down for the first time all year, They're trailing in the third quarter for only the second time all year, and they still managed to come back and win. I mean, you can almost kind of forgive them for the for the South Carolina meltdown, just because in literally every other game this year they've been able to come up with something when they needed it. And the South Carolina game was without E.J. Gaines and without James Franklin. And so I mean, when Missouri has been full strength this year, they've had answers. And even against Georgia at the end without E.J. Gaines and James Franklin, they found a way. So yeah, I mean, this team's got a resilience that yeah, I mean, I don't know if you would totally retire that moniker, but I think it would be on its way out, at least with this team.
Yeah, the only thing is, I think as you find out, you can win a big game, but then if you lose the next game, then suddenly you can't win the big game. The big game seems to be a moving target. I think the Buffalo Bills could tell you they won a lot of AFC Championship games that were big games, and then suddenly they're the losers when they didn't win the Super Bowl. So you do have to keep winning, but I think sometimes Missouri fans maybe revel in the failed history a little more than they should, and they sort of have that in common with Chicago Cubs fans, to where I think it can almost become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I never know how much college athletes really even are aware of those things until it gets mentioned to them. I think a lot of these kids are not from around here. When they come here, they don't really have much idea of the tradition. And it's not until they've been around for a while and it gets brought up to them that they would even be aware of that. So I don't know how much it really affects them. But it would be interesting to see, if Missouri does go on and win this SEC title, how much the narrative changes, or if you're just ready for the next time something weird happens that you zero in on that weird thing happening. Looking forward now, speaking of teams that don't choke, Auburn, my goodness, they're the opposite. They've won 4 games kind of in the last second this year, and the one against Georgia, obviously, and then the one against Alabama just Saturday sort of take the cake. So they're in it, and I think if you had polled Missouri fans ahead of time, they would prefer to be playing Auburn than Alabama, that's fair to say, but Auburn's obviously no slouch. Just how do you think Missouri matches up against them?
I think they match up better with them than Alabama, even though Auburn beat Alabama, obviously, and it was, like you said, in freakish circumstances on a 109-yard field goal or missed field goal return for a touchdown with literally 1 second to go. Yeah, but I think Missouri can match up better with Auburn, just because Auburn's strength, its bread and butter all year, has been the run game. I think they run for 318 yards a game. They're one of the best running teams in the nation, and they come at you a lot of different ways. But Missouri's been able to handle strong run games this year. I think probably South Carolina and Toledo statistically are about the 2 best running attacks they've faced this year. Toledo because of David Fluellen, and South Carolina because of Mike Davis, and they were able to do pretty well against them in the run game, just as they have against everyone this year. So I mean, Missouri's got enough speed on the edges to kind of try to hem Nick Marshall in and Corey Grant when they start going for the speed sweeps and things like that. And then the middle of their defense has shown enough push this year with Lucas Vincent, Matt Hoke, and then Kentrell Brothers and Andrew Wilson, Donovan Bonner, guys like that in the second level to kind of hold up when teams try to power against them. So I think that's a really good matchup for them. Defense to offense, I mean, it's still going to be tough. Auburn's still going to get its yards. It rushes for 200 yards against basically everybody. It ran for 296 against Alabama. So they're going to get their yards, but I think Missouri matches up well with them. And then they can do a lot more against Auburn's defense than they could have done against Alabama's, I think. Auburn, their defense is a lot like Missouri's. It's kind of lenient, but then once it kind of gets to crunch time, they're good at getting stops or getting field goals instead of touchdowns, whereas Alabama has just that shutdown potential where if things are going right, you're going to get 100 yards and 0 points and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think it's a better matchup for Missouri.
One thing about Auburn's offense, though, I think sometimes people talk about how they just run the ball, but the way they do it, it's so impossible to tell exactly where they're going to be running the ball to, that it just seems like it would be a really hard, if you're a defensive player, to stop. Because basically a play that looks the same way could end up in 3 vastly different spots in the line of scrimmage. And then if you throw in what they did on their last offensive touchdown, where the quarterback looks like he's going to run it, and then at the last second just decides to throw it. I mean, how do you defend that play?
Right.
I mean, you can't fault the cornerback for coming up to tackle the quarterback. So I just think just watching a film, it kind of reminds you of when Missouri used to have to go up against really dominant Nebraska or Oklahoma teams that ran the option. It's like, yeah, that's all they do, but they're so good at it. And even though it's coming, but it could come here, it could come here, it could come here. I mean, I think he's got a good thing going. So I think the fact they don't throw the ball much can sort of be irrelevant.
Yeah.
It has been for 11 of 12 games.
Right. Yeah, and they only really run like 5 or 6 plays, but like you said, they run so many different variations on those 5 or 6 plays, and they've got a fullback in Jay Proche, which is pretty much something that Missouri hasn't seen all season. They saw it a little bit with Cameron Clear, who was kind of a backfield tight end for Texas A&M, and he did a good job on a couple of those plays, clearing out the linebacker and getting big gains for their halfbacks. So, I mean, Proche is like basically another pulling guard that they use in the backfield. He's so good at blocking, and yeah, they do come at you from a lot of different directions.
And Missouri has not seen a quarterback like that. I mean, Johnny Manziel was incredibly elusive, but just in terms of raw speed,
Yeah.
I mean, one slight mistake, and it's not like you're going to tackle him for a 10-yard gain. He's gone.
Yeah,
I mean, he's not someone Missouri doesn't have a ton of speed in the defensive backfield anyway. I mean, that's going to be a dangerous factor, just limiting the big plays of him.
Mm-hmm.
Lastly, let's look at the ramifications if Missouri were to win or lose the SEC championship game. From the way it looks, to me anyway, for Missouri to get the ultimate prize, it's going to require them winning and Ohio State or Florida State losing. And since Florida State's playing Duke, we'll probably fixate on the Big Ten,
right.
Which is not out of the question that Michigan State could beat Ohio State. I'm not overly impressed with Ohio State. But it looks to me like either SEC team is probably going to need some help from Michigan State.
Yeah, definitely. I would say so as well. I mean, Auburn is closer just based solely on the points in the Harris poll and the USA Today poll and how close they are in the BCS. I mean, if they can change 25 voters' minds in the USA Today poll, if both Ohio State and Auburn win, they could possibly jump them. But Missouri's too far behind Ohio State at this point, too, if both of them win, jump them to get into the national championship game. And they're way too far behind Florida State for that to happen. So, yeah, if they win, they're basically looking at the Sugar Bowl, I would think. And if they lose, I mean, Capital One, Outback, something like that, they kind of get thrown into the tumble dry with South Carolina and Alabama and just, you know, they'll land where they do.
Yeah. If Missouri were, that's if Missouri were to win and Ohio State wins, though.
Right.
Obviously, I think if Missouri wins and Ohio State loses, there's no doubt. You think there's some question maybe in people's minds, would Alabama actually sneak up there?
No, that's not. I mean, Brad Edwards said as much on the BCS show last night. That's not going to happen. Missouri is so close behind Alabama right now in the BCS that, you know, a win over a top 3 team is definitely going to put them ahead of Alabama, yeah, should Ohio State lose. So, I mean, if they win and Ohio State loses, they're going to the national championship game. I can say that with 99.9999% certainty.
Yeah, and you could definitely have a debate of whether if whoever wins the SEC and Ohio State wins the Big Ten, why is it that Ohio State is deemed a better team? I think I struggle with that a bit when you look at the schedule Ohio State played, non-con, the weakness of the Big Ten, the way they've struggled to beat a few of those teams that are not very good. Mm-hmm. No offense to your alma mater, Northwestern, there is some offense to Michigan because they're also poor.
Right.
And those are very tight games that Ohio State was probably lucky to win. Whereas if you were to say, look at the resume of Missouri, they've beaten everybody by at least 7 points and everybody except Texas A&M by 14 or so. I think, and done it in a more difficult league. I don't know why people have this sort of idea in their mind, well, they're from a power conference, they're undefeated, so they deserve it.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that argument. I can also see that the SEC, I feel like it's a little down this year. I feel like it's not as powerful as it was in, say, 2010 or whatever year that was, that the SEC West just had 4 just juggernaut teams that were just beating each other down every week. So, I mean, the Big Ten's really down this year. The SEC's a little down this year. But I think, you know, if Ohio State gets through a schedule having beaten, basically Wisconsin and then a top 10 team in Michigan State and gets through it undefeated, I mean, I think in most voters' minds, that's enough to get you to the national championship game. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but I think that's probably what's going on in most people's minds.
I guess the bottom line for Missouri is I think you can get all worked up, and I think some fans have, about they're being disrespected, which I hate, the whole discussion. But if you win this game on Saturday and you go to the Sugar Bowl, I mean, if you're going to be upset about that, then perhaps you need to find another hobby than watching sports, because that's pretty good. Mm-hmm. All right, well, tune in next week. We will discuss the SEC championship game and Missouri's bowl destination.